And then now we get into foundations. And this is going to help us understand the fake left and how it's sustained today. Foundations are the main instrument of financial support for most of these fake left groups. And I'm not saying that for instance, even during this period, most of these groups were not funded directly by the CIA. Rather, the CIA used foundations as cover in order to fund fake left groups. So this gets into 1956, and there's J.M. Kaplan, who, once again, we see the ties between capital and individual capitalists and the CIA. So the CIA, again, I need to stress this point. The CIA is capitalism's invisible army. It's explicitly an arm of capital, and what it does is it basically creates these kind of private militias for capital, for individual capitalists, and uses their money to help fund its operations. So J.M. Kaplan, who was a very wealthy, very, very wealthy millionaire at that time, and he had $14 million in his foundation at that time in 1956, which is hundreds of millions of dollars today, right, adjusted for inflation. And J.M. Kaplan got his wealth from the grape juice company. He also funded a lot of other. He was a genuinely crazy man. Like a lot of these capitalists. I mean, look at Jeff Bezos. I mean, these people are psychos. They're like, or Peter Thiel, who like apparently, according to some media articles, this guy is interested in like blood transfusions. He's like basically a vampire to try to stay young. These people are. When you have over $1 billion, you just become a total psycho. But anyway, so J.M. Kaplan helps create the Kaplan Foundation. He wrote to Allen Dulles, the godfather of the CIA and the American deep state, offering his services in the fight against communism. And he said he offered to devote his unending energy to utilize every idea and ingenuity to overriding aim of working out, or whatever, of breaking up every communist conspiracy, etc., etc. So they made a foundation, and the Kaplan Foundation could soon be counted as a CIA asset, a reliable pass-through for secret funds earmarked for CIA projects. That term pass-through is extremely important. What a pass-through means, and today there are similar foundations like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Open Society Foundations, of a billionaire whose name you're never allowed to mention. I'll whisper it here. George Soros. Ooh! Oh no, George Soros. I mean, clearly the right wing they have an obsessive anti-Semitic kind of, scapegoating of George Soros, and that's true. Of course, we should oppose the kind of anti-Semitic scapegoating, but at the same time, George Soros has a very long history of working with the CIA front groups, and his foundation, which has billions of dollars in assets, the Open Society Foundation, is one of the main pass-throughs, focused more on Europe than on the United States, but it funds so many of these fake left groups and these so-called progressive groups that are all pro-imperialist and anti-communist. And then this line is very important from the book here. The use of philanthropic foundations was the most convenient way to pass large sums of money to CIA projects without alerting the recipients of their source. By the mid-1950s, the CIA's intrusion into the foundation field was massive. Now, there's an important qualifier here. Many of the recipients didn't even know that they were getting money from the CIA. This is important. Gloria Steinem knew she was working for the CIA. And when we see her endorsing Hillary Clinton on stage with, this incredible war hawk who, after killing Muammar Gaddafi, the president of Libya, in this horrible bloodbath from Salafi jihadist extremists who, they killed him with a bayonet. They sodomized him with a bayonet. And then Hillary Clinton on TV says, we saw he died, yay! I mean, total sociopath. I mean, a lot of these people are total sociopaths. Part of our materialist analysis of history is also understanding that, like, the ruling class is full of these deranged figures who are genuine sociopaths. But anyway, Gloria Steinem was an exception. The majority of the figures during this period did not know they were receiving CIA money. So there's a host of many literary magazines and left-wing magazines. The most famous is an anti-communist magazine called Partisan Review. Partisan Review was founded originally as a socialist magazine that supported the Soviet Union. and throughout World War II supported the Soviet Union, even under the leadership of Stalin at the time. I mean, let's not forget that the Soviet Union, under the leadership of Stalin, was also allied with the US and the UK during World War II. So it was not uncommon. But right at the beginning of the first Cold War, the CIA started funding so-called left-wing journals like the Partisan Review, and then they had a shift in editorial stance and they became diehard anti-communists. So I think a lot of the people working there didn't know they were receiving CIA money. And I wouldn't be surprised today if some social democratic journals and magazines that are very popular among the anti-communist, pro-imperialist left, I would not be surprised in any way if they were also receiving money through similar pass-throughs through foundations, and they didn't realize that it's intelligence money. I'm not accusing them of knowingly taking intelligence money. I'm saying that it's very possible. So anyway, going forward, so it says, unlike the power of corporate management, this would be unchecked by stockholders. Unlike the power of government, it is unchecked by the people. Unlike the power of churches, it is unchecked by any firmly established canons of value. So this is explaining why the so-called consortium here, this private CIA apparatus that was constructed, is very powerful, because if there is an information request, so a public records request, in the United States it's called a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. It has a very similar acronym throughout other countries. If journalists, the very few, want to investigate this, they often won't find information on it because it's being done privately through the CIA, through its black budget, being funded by billionaire capitalists, oligarchs. And then, of course, because it's not done through a big corporation, you don't have the same paper trail. If you do it through a big foundation, especially a pass-through like the Ford Foundation or Rockefeller or Tides Foundation, what you can do is it works the same way that dark money works. Dark money, in the term, in the United States at least, is used to refer to how billionaires and these big companies will send money to a foundation called a dark money group that has usually foundation legal status, and then that group sends the money to a politician to fund their political campaign. And that way, for instance, the Koch brothers, some of the rich, well, one of them's dead now, but the Koch brothers can fund, with their billions and billions of dollars in wealth, can fund ultra-white right-wing politicians, but those politicians can say, I don't have Koch money, prove it. And it's hard to prove because it goes through a foundation pass-through, which when the Koch brothers do it, it's called dark money, which is, I mean, it should be called dark money, but when the CIA does it, it's called democracy promotion, yay, or it's called supporting whatever, civil rights or feminism or whatever. So it's the same concept. So then she goes on and says, CIA funding was involved in nearly half of the grants made by 164 foundations in the field of international activities. This is so important. She did an analysis of looking at all of these grants at 164 foundations and found that CIA funding was involved in nearly half of the grants. And what is it focused on? International activities, imperialism. So we need to understand that intelligence is deeply linked in supporting. So when you see a group funded by the Ford Foundation or Rockefeller Foundation or Open Society, and they focus on Russia or China or Latin America or whatever, that's extremely suspicious, extremely suspicious. And what she says, bona fide foundations such as Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie were considered the best and most plausible kind of funding cover. It allowed the CIA to fund a seemingly limitless range of covert action programs affecting youth groups, labor unions, and universities, publishing houses, and other private institutions from the early 1950s on. That still is happening today. To this day, it is happening. There was a cover branch at CIA whose job it was to help provide cover, like the foundations we used for our operations, Braden explained, who was involved in the operations. So later on, she says, she documents here, this is again such an important book, I can't recommend it enough. She documents that known to have wittingly facilitated CIA-funded passes were over 170 foundations. 170. And in addition to the big players like Ford, Rockefeller, and Carnegie, I would also add Open Society. In addition, you have these smaller foundations, the Miami District Fund, the Price Fund. I don't even know what these are, but the point is a lot of foundations. So, and this is true for Europe as well. It's not just the United States, of course. In fact, when it got its start, it was focused on Western Europe, and then it began focusing more in the 1960s when the New Left was rising, the New Communist movement was very powerful, and the left was growing, and there were genuine fears in the United States of a revolution. You had the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, and a variety of other groups that were not only revolutionaries, they were armed. And the US government was so afraid, of course, that the FBI ran its infamous counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO. The FBI executed communist leaders like the Chicago Black Panther chairman, Fred Hampton. Also, we know it's an established fact that US intelligence agencies were deeply involved in the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. This is an incontrovertible fact. So later, the joke was that if any American philanthropic or cultural organization carried the word free or private in its literature, it must be a CIA front. So one example of that is the Fairfield Foundation, also the France America Society, and then, of course, the Rockefeller Foundation and the Rockefeller family. Again, we need to understand that the CIA being the nexus between private capital and organized crime, working together to use the wealth of private capitalists to fund the war, the international war on socialism. And of course, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is still a very important group that comes out of the Rockefeller family, oligarchs. The Council on Foreign Relations has a very strong influence on Western foreign policy and NATO. And of course, other prominent members included Alan Dulles and David Rockefeller. She calls it a private think tank made of America's corporate and social elite, which acted as a kind of shadow foreign policy making unit. Extremely important.